launched his third and final attempt at approaching the islanders after writing a final 3-page journal entry in pencil, mostly consisting of farewell messages to his family and friends. Writing, "You guys might think I'm crazy in all this, but I think it's worth it to declare Jesus' name. Please do not be angry with them or at God, and that the eternal lives of this tribe is at hand, and I can't wait to see them around the throne." A day or so later, after returning from their normal fishing routine, the fishermen complicit in illegally ferrying Chow to the island watched as his lifeless body was dragged along the beach with a rope and buried. According to an email sent by a fellow missionary to Chow's mother, he was never to be seen again. The Indian authorities have since prosecuted 7 people involved in this, but the question over what, if anything, should be done for Chow's remains still lingers. A helicopter was sent to assess the situation on the 20th of November, and on the 24th, a boat filled with local policemen came to the site of Chow's death, hoping to procure the body. They wisely maintained a distance of some 400 meters away from the beach, where they stared down the Sentinelese in a tense standoff. Nothing more was done, and frankly, it should probably stay that way. A murder case was opened, but that's understandably been heavily criticized, and it's not like any of the Sentinelese are ever going to be arrested for this, and Chow himself wrote, "Don't retrieve my body." Different people have reacted to Chow's failed mission in wildly different ways. Some of his fellow missionaries praise him as a martyr.
I don't have a gun.
Most others call him an idiot.
I don't have a gun.
But I personally don't think he's either. I do truly admire that he was so committed to his dream and to serving something bigger than himself, that he was willing to and did perish. But at the same time, his very presence on the island put the people he was trying to help in mortal danger. Admittedly, he was vaccinated for 13 different illnesses and quarantined himself before going to the island, but who knows what pathogens he could have and maybe did unwittingly transfer to them. As we'll see, their relatives on the larger and more populous Andamans were completely decimated by horrible diseases unwittingly brought by the British, and some may have even already gotten to the island. So these people have no immunity to diseases we don't even think about anymore. But the main flaw with Chow's idea was just the fact that he didn't do his research. I mean, he did research. He compiled a giant dossier on his plans to ingratiate himself with the Sentinelese, complete with a map of safe landing sites. But he just chose to ignore so many aspects of the island's historical context. First, the islanders have never allowed outsiders to stay on their island without either A, melting into the island's dense jungle interior to wait for the right moment to strike, or B, immediately confronting the trespasser with a hail of arrows. Though for a brief period in the early 90s, that wasn't the case, and there was some friendly contact between outside parties and the Sentinelese, but we'll get to that at the end of the video. And the one time a British colonial official named Maurice Vidal Portman was able to force his way into the interior without an immediate response in 1880, he forcibly abducted an elderly couple and some children. You know what happened to those Sentinelese that Portman kidnapped? The 2 elderly people sickened rapidly and died, and it's possible that Portman abused the children in the worst way possible. When Indian authorities again penetrated into the island's interior in 1967, some of its less scrupulous members raided the abandoned village they came across for souvenirs, and there's even evidence that the Sentinelese were the last recipients of a syphilis epidemic that ravaged across the islands in the 1880s. But we don't know who spread it or how. Was it the British? Was it contact with other Andamanese people infected by the British? Or maybe it was the Malay pirates that were accustomed to raiding the Andamans for slaves. And it's very possible that, just as Chow observed himself, the Sentinelese may still have to deal with the occasional unsavory poacher or smuggler from elsewhere in Southeast Asia. So though the untimely death of Chow is undoubtedly a tragedy, my point is, us outsiders have always left a bitter taste in the Sentinelese' mouths, and we always seem to go too far. So why should they expect anything different now? The drunk fisherman incident of 2006. If you've heard anything else about North Sentinel Island besides the unfortunate fate of John Allen Chow, you probably also heard of the similar fates which befell 2 Indian fishermen who found themselves illegally fishing in the restricted waters surrounding the island, which unfortunately meant that they didn't see the end of January 2006. Back in 1956, the Indian government passed the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act, which banned private visits to the island and forbid any boats from getting closer than 5 nautical miles from it, mostly to spare the Sentinelese from the contagious diseases we outsiders would inevitably transfer to them, though that of course didn't stop official visits to them. But anyways, this exclusion zone is regularly patrolled by the Navy and Coast Guard, at least ostensibly. Later on, we'll see that it's a bit more porous than it should be, and the same kind of small fishing boat these 2 fishermen were piloting had become a common sight off the island in the late 90s, with residents of nearby Port Blair looking to privately take part in dismantling the cargo ships rotting on the reefs there. But what happened to these 2 fishermen seems like a pretty clear sign that to the Sentinelese, they were far from welcome. Sundar Raj and Pandit Tiwari were 2 ex-cons that somehow became friends in prison, despite going there for very different reasons. Raj had murdered his ex-wife, and Tiwari had been jailed for petty theft. After being released, they bought a fishing dinghy, using money reportedly dubiously siphoned off from the aid money sent to the islands after it was devastated by the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. A couple of years later, in January of 2006, the 2 men joined a convoy of ships fishing in the exclusion zone off North Sentinel, after setting off from nearby Wandoor. At some point, they reportedly got drunk on palm wine and fell asleep, and while they were unconscious, their boat began drifting towards the island. According to the other fishermen there that night, the 2 men were immediately encircled by a body of Sentinelese men armed with axes, and were immediately killed, though possibly after escaping the boat and making a run for it. It's possible that the reason for this was that they aroused the Sentinelese' anger by showing up unannounced and by not offering them any gifts, since every other friendly expedition to the island did so. And there's a good chance that the Sentinelese have encountered other illegal poachers that we don't know about. We have no idea how that would have turned out, but ultimately we'll never know their exact motives, other than that these were intruders, they didn't belong on their island. There was at least one attempted official gift-dropping expedition made in 2005, but it had also been a very long time since the last really friendly encounters between the Sentinelese and outsiders in the early 90s. One journalist also raised the possibility that, since there isn't actually any hard testimony from the other poachers there on account of them, being there illegally and being unwilling to share concrete testimony, and no autopsies being done on the bodies, that maybe the 2 men had drunk themselves to death before reaching shore. What exactly happened to the bodies is a bit muddled because different secondary sources disagree about what exactly went down. The Sentinelese, for their part, definitely weren't happy with the helicopter that came round to inspect the bodies. According to one source, the pilot reported that they were just 200 meters away and were attacking my helicopter with everything they had. Arrows were flying everywhere. So the helicopter had to temporarily vacate the area. Once it came back, though, the bodies were nowhere to be seen. But the Sentinelese were still hanging around, and obviously still pretty annoyed, so the helicopter crew drew the Sentinelese away from the rough positions of the bodies by flying to the other end of the island. When they followed it there, the helicopter made a beeline back where it had first spotted the bodies and somehow rediscovered them when its rotors kicked up the sand the Sentinelese had buried them in. According to one source, one of the fishermen's bodies was actually recovered, while the other had to be abandoned.
Keep it.
A more recent academic source reveals that the most the authorities were able to do was show the photos of the bodies, which of course never came public, to one of the deceased's wives, and alluded to other family members being allowed to peek at the bodies from a distance with binoculars. The local Indian settler community over the government's failure to retrieve the bodies was real, and some, like Sundar Raj's wife, called for revenge against the island. She threatened to take her case to court and decried the Sentinelese as murderers. A bit ironic since she married one herself, but oh well. Conversations with the broader community also revealed that they generally felt that the Sentinelese ought to have been settled and made to work hard like them, so that their land could be put to better use, whatever that means. So thank God the situation didn't boil over into a hostile takeover, because it seems like it really could have at some point. But Tawari's family had the opposite response, though. His father said, "As far as I am concerned, the Sentinelese are the victims in this, not my son. They live in constant terror of heavily armed poachers from Myanmar, Burma,
Do y'all have extra stick?
They were only defending themselves with bows and arrows and rocks, in the only way they know how. What I do want is my son's body, so my wife and I can cremate him. It is an impossible case to prosecute anyway." There was also some talk of mounting an expedition to retrieve the bodies after tensions cooled down for a bit, but that never went anywhere. And it was only until I was writing this script that I discovered that a repeat of this exact thing happened at the tail end of 2023. This time, 3 fishermen, again from Wandoor, suddenly disappeared, with the only clue to their whereabouts being that their dinghy was spotted grounded on the shoals near North Central Island. This time there weren't any bodies, but I'm pretty sure we can all guess what must have happened. Though at the time, the families reasoned that they were still alive. Talk of a rescue operation was reported. For whatever reason, this story doesn't seem to have gone international like the one from 2006, but it's still a very interesting case. The wreck of the MV Primrose, 1981.
Oh.
Shortly before midnight on August 2nd, 1981, a Panamanian-registered freighter traveling between Bangladesh and Australia, its cargo mostly consisting of poultry feed and fertilizer, suddenly ran aground on a coral reef just off the northwestern coast of North Sentinel Island. The wreck's husk, though largely broken up throughout the 90s, is still visible on Google Earth and is definitely up there as one of the weirdest things visible from satellite. So you've probably heard about it before. The sea was too rough for its crew of 28 to lower their lifeboats, so the captain obviously kept the crew on board, which turned out to be a very fortuitous decision given what was just about to happen. After 3 days of just sitting there, they finally caught a glimpse of their Sentinelli hosts, and they did not look very welcoming. At first they confused them with a rescue party, but that quickly changed when they brought out some binoculars and saw who they really were. Based on their hostile gestures and the fact that they were carrying bows and spears, the crew of the Primrose quickly realized the danger they were in and plunged into panic. And the captain immediately sent the following SOS message to their bosses at the Regent Shipping Company headquartered in Hong Kong. Estimate more than 50, carrying various homemade weapons. The next 2 or 3 wooden boats, worrying they will board us at sunset. All crew members' lives are not guaranteed. Hilariously, a spokesman from the government of Hong Kong said the captain...
Does anyone have Cyprian now? It's like my name.
He also requested an immediate airdrop of guns. Luckily, it doesn't seem to have ended up happening. Primrose's crew
knocked one up there.
24-hour guard with whatever perceivable weapons they could find lying about, including a flare gun, some axes, and some bits of pipe. And even before the situation was resolved, it became a bit of a media sensation. And another spokesman from the Indian government even had to deny that the islanders were cannibals. We'll see where that myth comes from in a bit, but I can tell you that it involves Marco Polo.
They're nomads.
After almost a week had passed of this tense standoff, the stranded sailors were airlifted off the Primrose in a helicopter that had to make 3 different relays with a rope ladder dangled down to them. Luckily, the dramatic scene was captured in photographs taken by the pilot, an American named Robert Ford, whose pictures eventually wound up in this Der Spiegel article. Apparently, the wreck was initially like 400 feet off the coast, right across from a little spit, but given how much the island was uplifted in 2004, which we'll get to, it's basically right on it now. And if you play around with the dates of the satellite imagery of it, you can see that either sea levels around the island are rising, or the boat itself is sinking. From 2011 on, you can see its hull getting more and more submerged. And what's even more interesting is that the Primrose has a definite history post this incident, and there are actually eyewitness reports of the Sentinelese climbing up onto the boat with official shipbreakers on it and getting iron from it. Which leads us to our next topic. 20th century Iron Age myth. And this leads me to one of the most widespread myths about the Sentinelese, that they didn't have iron until shipwrecks like the Primrose started running aground on the island's reefs, which just isn't true. But I don't blame you for not knowing that. The references to the Sentinelese and other Andamanese groups possessing iron tools is mostly buried in really old obscure books and websites, and before looking into them for this video, I thought that too. I even remember bringing it up as a fun fact about them pretty recently. But as I've also learned, the Sentinelese destroy every expectation you'd have of them at every corner you turn. Despite their extreme isolation, the Sentinelese make enormous iron arrowheads, knives, and adze heads.
There's somebody coming up behind you. He's coming from
the larger end.
No way. No fucking way. I got knocked.
Its stone precursor was super popular back in prehistory, and curiously, stone examples were popular until
there's a gold shotgun on my body.
In the South Pacific. Here's some footage of the Sentinelese using their iron examples to rake in coconuts thrown at them. I love how nonchalantly they swing them over their shoulders. It just looks so natural for some reason. Maybe I have blood memory from the Neolithic, who knows?
There should be 8 left in that wingsuit.
Aside, reports of iron being in demand in the Andamans go back way, way further than you'd think. When the Chinese monk Yi Tsing was passing by the island, he referred to as the land of the naked people, on his way to India in the early 670s AD, he reported that when the natives saw our vessel coming, they eagerly embarked in little boats.
You gotta build, you gotta hit that boost, you gotta do something.
They all brought coconuts, bananas, and things made of rattan.
Leave it there behind the rock, leave it there behind the rock.
And wished to exchange them. What they are anxious to get is iron only. For a piece of iron as large as 2 fingers, one gets from them 5 to 10 cocoa nuts. The natives live solely on cocoa nuts and tubers. There's not much life. Therefore, what they hold most precious and valuable is loha, which is the name for iron. There is a possibility that he's referring to the Shompen people of the Nicobars just south of the Andamans here, because he explicitly says that the population was not black. The Andamanese definitely are, but there's solid physical evidence of iron being in the Andamans in the form of an unidentifiable piece of iron of unknown origins found within the bottommost layer of a site just west of Port Blair called Chaldari Midden, which dates to 2,300 years ago. Also very much in line with Yi Tsing's account, Arab travelers in the 9th century recorded that when a ship passes near, the men come out in boats of various sizes and barter ambergris and coconuts for iron. Much more recently, but still quite a while back ago, in 1867, the captain of another boat which ran aground on North Sentinel's reefs, the Nineveh, reported that the weapons that he and his crew were at the pointy ends of were tipped with what else but iron. Then later on, a certain colonial administrator named Maurice Vidal Portman, who we'll definitely be rounding back to, noted that the presents which the Ongis most appreciate are hoop iron, rod iron, files, sleeping mats, coconuts, plantains, etc. etc. Now, these Ongis are pretty universally recognized as being the Sentinelese closest living relatives. When an official Indian gift-dropping mission pushed its luck in 1974, the Sentinelese fired an arrow at a film director. The footage I'm using is from what he was making, Man vs. Man, and it hit his thigh. Luckily, it was only a flesh wound, but the anthropologist